And he wrote for 200 pages about the history of missions. This conference that was in New York in 1898, this one that was in Geneva in 1901, and it just kind of went on that way. But then it got to about 6 or 8 pages that just really kind of blew me away. And I'd like to share with you what, in a more elaborate way, what was on those pages. You each have in front of you a sheet with 2 sides, and if you don't, there are a couple up in the front, and maybe you can look on with someone else if you didn't get one. But as you know, most of us here grew up in the Enlightenment. I think that needs to be turned off. Do you know how to do that, Jerry? There is a switch in the sacristy to switch, and our tech person is at happening. So sorry, being a teenager. So I wanted to. The man's name was David Bosch. He was South American, who sadly was killed in a car accident not long after he wrote this book in the 1990s. And the book is called Transforming Mission, Paradigm Shifts in the Theology of Mission. And he talked about the impact of, over time, of the Enlightenment, which is the period when the Anglican Church was founded, on Christianity. And if you look at the, I guess first of all I'll talk. Over time, well no, if you look at the chart on the Enlightenment on the side with the boxes on it, if you look at Enlightenment, you'll recognize things probably that were part of your life growing up. I know they were part of mine. The rights of the individual in the time of the Enlightenment are very important. And this rise of the rights of the individual as opposed to the rights of the village or the community led to revolutions. The French Revolution, the revolution of the American colonies. And then, over time, revolution after revolution with involved in colonialism. Why don't we just turn it off? Okay?
Yeah, I can't.
Here.
People aren't here today who could do it.
Yes, I was saying our tech person. Is it happening? So the rights of the individual grew over the time of the Enlightenment, which began with Bacon and with the first scientific law, which was about gravity. And so over the time, the rights of the individual grew. Individual improvement became very important. And capitalism flourished, supported by the understandings of the Enlightenment. There was a sense that there was immutable scientific law, that science would solve eventually, science and reason would eventually be able to solve all of the problems of the world. That creation was completed and that revelation was completed. There was a sense that humanity was on an upward trajectory, that we were becoming better people, that we were becoming more peace-loving, that we were becoming more the kind of people God and Jesus wanted us to become. Continually improving in ethics, in morality, in the way we treated each other. We also believed, and this was grounded in some of the language of Genesis, which can be translated, as you know, with different inflections, but humanity believed that the environment was for our use, not for our protection, but for our use. And as the Enlightenment went on, over the hundreds of years of the Enlightenment, we lived that out, and we bear some of the benefits today. And then they believed, have you ever heard that history repeats itself? How many people have heard that? I mean, certainly I was taught that. We believe that history could be documented and used as a base for future action and for growth. And then, as I said earlier, answers to all the questions of the world would ultimately come through science and reason. Modernism was something that began with art and architecture in the 1920s, and it was fueled by the work of Einstein. The idea of relativity, that the world folds over on itself, that the universe folds over on itself, and that the universe is infinite. That really rocked this boat, you know? And beginning with that, we saw slow and gradual change. In the 1960s, the change was pushed harder by young people who kind of got on board. There was a lot of rebellion against the strictures of the culture, and the war in Vietnam fueled that. But it was happening anyway. After World War II, as you know, it was important to go home, have families, raise them in a very traditional way. And then in the 60s, those children raised in that traditional way worked hard to change the world. And I don't know, some of you, I'm certain, were a part of that, others weren't. But we all were very aware of it. And so that really was one of the big turning points, the late 60s, early 70s. But it's only slowly kind of seeped out into our culture. And postmodernism involves four shifts. One, from the objective to the subjective, from the autonomous individual to community, from a meta-narrative, an all-encompassing narrative of progress, to smaller micro-narratives, from word to image. And you can see, if we go back to the chart, postmodernism, it is something that I see as inevitable as our world has shrunk through global communication. You know, we can see pictures on our television of unrest and see someone carrying their dead child that happened in the midst of the terrorism or the unrest almost immediately as it's happening. That's so different than reading it in a newspaper or hearing about it, as in the early days of the Enlightenment you ultimately would, as news came on a clipper ship over months. You know, we are really drawn into the lives of other people. We begin to see the impact that we have as a nation on other nations, that we as individuals have on other individuals throughout the world. And we can't avoid it. We can't avoid being touched by them and by their suffering. And so it creates a global community. We don't only know about the people who live in our family and in our village. When I was in Easton, Maryland, there was a man who came up to me and talked about, he felt how poorly the world had changed. He said, you know, when I grew up, I only knew the children on the farms around me. I didn't know anybody else. And today our children are impacted by such models from outside of the village, of the small community. And, you know, he wished that we could go back to that day when his grandchildren would only know the neighboring families. Obviously, you know, we can't do that. It's not possible. And so there is a creation these days that we live in the midst of a global community through the ease of transportation and communication. If we move on to scientific law, and it's interesting, I had a conversation with a few people from the physics department at Bowdoin about this at Christmas time, which was really quite interesting to me, because I'd never really tried out these things on them, and they agreed with me. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but the most basic of chemical elements, there are little tiny bits of atoms that can jump from one atom to another. They're called quarks. Quarks, right? Yes. And they jump from one part to another. So we never understood this before. That creates a change that we weren't aware of before. And also the infinity was what the physics department particularly thought was a good thing to be talking about in this range. This idea that the world is infinite means that we will never understand it through science and reason. And so we have scientific law has become somewhat relative. There's even been proof that The speed of light there's been one test that's overturned the idea of the speed of light being what it is. And they were sure that that would be turned back again. But we're discovering new things, and we have to change our view of the world to put new things that come along into it. Now we believe in ongoing creation. We believe that we are created over time as we grow older and older through Christ that's within us. And we are aware that God continues to create and recreate the world. And ongoing revelation. We no longer believe that word for word what was written in the Bible is the only source of revelation to us. In the Gospel of John, not the Gospel of John, the letters of Paul, we read that if you're a slave, stay a slave. And yet we have, over time, come to believe that slavery is not, that slavery is a horrible thing. And the idea of slavery, human trafficking within our country is a growing issue that just indicates once again our present feelings about slavery have changed tremendously from the words that are in our Bible. And you could list a whole number of things that you might read in the Bible that we no longer believe are what God is revealing to us. So we believe that God continues God's revelation, that it didn't end in the year sometime in 300 when a group of people got together and decided what books would be in the Bible. And also there is a Gospel of Thomas that we look at and find much more information about Jesus. And for some reason, I'm sure that the scriptural historians could tell you what reason, that's not part of our Bible. And there's the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. There are other Gospels that were present during the time of Jesus that we've begun to look at now, but that are not part of our Bible. So the idea of ongoing creation, the idea of ongoing revelation is part of our postmodern culture that we live in today. Sadly, we no longer believe, if we really think hard about it, that we are on an upward trajectory of morals and values. World War I was the war to end all wars, and then after World War I we had the Holocaust, we had the killings in Rwanda, we have what's been happening in Sudan in this last decade. Obviously, we still have a lot of work to do to improve, to be on an upward trajectory when it comes to our morals and our values as a world. And we now have come to understand at a level we never could have imagined before that our environment is entrusted to us, for us to care for us to use perhaps for the betterment of humanity, but that it is entrusted to us rather than something for us to use when you think of England when London apparently, because of all the coal fires in people's homes, was just a dark place filled with soot. That was part of the Industrial Revolution. And we now understand about the balancing needs. And one of the needs, there is need for industrialization, but there's also need for clean air. And so we work with that tension. And we realize that we need to protect the environment, that what we've done over these decades has an impact. When I was in Africa, one of the people traveling with me looked up at a constellation, well actually the Southern Cross, which is wonderful to see. You can't see it on this side of the equator, and they said it's upside down. And I thought about that, and perhaps if you live in South Africa, you might think that South Africa is the top of the world, and Antarctica is the top of the world rather than the Arctic Circle. It has, these days, we can begin to kind of put that in our consciousness, and we can begin to see that the Northern European, United States, Canadian, perhaps, view of the world is not everyone's view. You used to believe that if someone from Oxford wrote a history of the world, it was the history of the world. That was it. You could go out and buy it, and you'd know what the history was. But if someone who had lived under apartheid in South Africa wrote a history of the world, it would be totally different. If someone who lived in great affluents in Australia wrote a history of the world. Unless they had studied in England, it would be different too. And we've begun to realize that history is not, that there is not one history, and that each one of us has our own history. Our own history impacts the way we see the world. And so that's when they talk about going from a meta-narrative to a micro-narrative. We begin to realize that history is our history, and that someone can write a history from a Northern European point of view, but it won't be the history written by a historian in Guatemala, or in Brazil, or in Chile. Our views of the world are different, and we've come to be able to kind of expand our sense of reality to be able to understand that. And then answers to all of our questions can be found through reason and science. We don't any longer believe that if we believe the world is infinite. It's challenging for me to put my brain around all that, but I believe it's true. People with brains far better than mine have come to that conclusion, and no one yet has said that it's not true. And so we begin to understand that there are no universal answers to questions, that the answers are answers we create for our own lives, and we are part of a country, we're part of a world that makes decisions. We have to have leaders, but that answer to every question can't be found through reason and science. And ultimately, you might say that everything is local. And so the impact today is pretty powerful. And we see it in the changing, in somewhat the way we live our lives, particularly in the way that younger people lead their lives. You look back up to the rights of the individual, I think we're beginning to see in a new way the need for community in our lives. People understand that our actions impact the rest of the world and the future generations. Also, I don't know how many hours you spend at a computer, but I can sit down at 7 o'clock at night and stand up at 10:30 or 11 and have had, a decent evening. I mean, that's partially exacerbated because of the fact I live alone. But, we are very isolated by our computers and the fact that it's a one-on-one process. And we need community. And a lot of people these days talk about coming to church or being part of a book group or even going to the gym as a need for community. When we move on to the immutable scientific laws, we can see that this idea that infinity exists raises up, people used to say, or I was taught in seminary, and it's widely believed among theologians, that the Enlightenment, quote, killed Christianity. It moved us from believing that reason really supplanted faith. We didn't want to believe in a miracle that we couldn't explain, and that really decreased our ability to have faith in God and God's action and movement in the world. And so now we find an increased interest in mysticism. How many people say they're spiritual but not religious? There's even an acronym, SNR, for spiritual but not religious. And it's out there, and it's a tremendous force in our country, and I'm certain, I know certainly in Europe and many places like that in the world. And so there's an increased interest in mysticism, an increased interest in our spiritual lives. Pam will say again at the second service that the highest number of books that are bought are about Buddhism. And Buddhism is a deeply spiritual way of life that doesn't necessarily have a set of things you have to believe. And that shows the shift in our culture. And we believe now that we can change throughout our lives, that we aren't who we were. Someone once said to me, I was done when I was confirmed, that's it. I'm not going to change. I believe what I believe then, but we don't really believe that, and I don't think he would today either. We believe that we grow and change. Hopefully, we become more like Christ throughout our lives. This is the choir. Hopefully, we become more like Christ throughout our lives as we're growing and we're changing. And we believe that God continues to reveal God's self to us. this idea that humanity being on an upward trajectory that's been pretty demolished in the 20th century leads us to acknowledge that we really struggle with this. We struggle with our ethics and our morals as a people today. We're not oblivious to that. And not that people in the past were, but we are not. And because I believe people in the past did think that we were on this upward trajectory and that we were becoming better and better people. And we realize that we struggle with good and evil in our own lives. And that that's part of human nature. You know, in the baptismal covenant, we say that we promise to repent and return to the Lord. I mean, we do it again and again and again throughout our lives. We see ourselves today in relation to nature. We're not above nature anymore. You know, we work with nature, and we hope to actually enhance the health of the nature that surrounds us. Institutions are questions. How many of the young people say that they're not interested in churches because it's an institution? And they have very solid reasons for saying that. We believe that there is the belief is coming today that there's no truth that can be understood and stated, and that everything is experience rather than truth. It's about how you live your life instead of a list of what you believe. And then, in the midst of all that, as you can see, there is a tremendous interest in moving from our heads to our hearts. And it's all tied up with mysticism and a need to find God in our lives that's evidenced by the interest in Buddhism. So our world is changing unbelievably, and I think we can see the impact of the change in our pews and in the fact that there just aren't so many young people in them anymore. And as a church, we need to be adjusting who we are so that there can ultimately be an Episcopal church 30 years from now. And down here, at the bottom of the chart is, I don't know if you're aware of InterVarsity USA, but it's a very conservative group that's on college campuses. And they decided some years ago, back around 2000, that this is what they were going to do during the coming century, or in the beginning of the coming century, to increase their impact on young people. They were going to move in their talking from the objective to the subjective. They were going to move from talking about autonomous individuals to talking about community and working hard to build community. They were going to move from these large narratives good. I was afraid it was 5 after when it's time to go. To micro-narratives, understanding the importance of our own histories and our own understanding of history. And they were going to move from word to image. And it struck me, you know, I think we Episcopalians, with our ability to live in the gray, see ourselves as perhaps far more on the cutting edge of these things. But whether you're conservative or liberal or moderate doesn't impact how well you understand the culture we're in and try to reach out to young people in the midst of that culture. I think we in the Episcopal Church are incredibly situated to be a light in the world to young people, just by who we are and our flexibility. If you turn the page over, we believe that creation is ongoing. We have a diminished hierarchy. We don't have a pope. Our presiding bishop presides over the House of Bishops. She represents us in the Anglican Communion, but she doesn't preside over you and me. She really has no impact other than influence on you and me. The bishop of this diocese has influence on us, but mainly presides over deacons and priests when it comes down to it all. And also to whether you can add an addition upstairs. We have to go to the standing committee. Authority in our church is based on trust rather than a title that you've been given. Effective leadership is visionary. We believe that the spirituality of life and work are the roots of our ministry. We reward innovation, and work follows gifts, and work is collaborative. We ask, what are the gifts God's given you? And where do those gifts meet with the world's greatest needs? And that's where our ministries are. And we talk about us having ministries. And I think that our ability to live in the gray and in the ambiguities of life could be a beacon for young people if they knew about us. You know, people talk about the Episcopal Church as the world's best kept secret. And I think through our very nature it is. You know, we're not likely to go out there knocking on doors and kind of telling people they need to, for their own salvation, they have to come and worship with us. And yet in this culture, we offer really powerful icons and images and ways of being for younger people. And so once I was at a conference, and the previous presiding bishop, Frank Griswold, was there, and I asked him, well, where's the solid ground in the midst of all of this change? You know, sometimes I feel like I'm walking on quicksand. I don't know about you, but where's the solid ground? And he thought his answer was not very good, but I thought it was brilliant and true, that the solid ground is Jesus and the Eucharist, that never changes. Jesus is always in the bread and the wine that we receive, and that Jesus existed as Christ before he became human, lived on earth, and is with us through the Holy Spirit today. And then, so I don't know if you'd like to talk about this. I can talk more about the list here of the leaders that a church needs. Maybe I'll just go through that quickly, and then we can have a conversation about all this. The church, the Episcopal Church, our parishes need leaders who are adaptive, who are able to make the efforts, which can be very difficult to help a parish adapt to the 21st century. Who can act through and within the pressure to maintain the status quo, who recognizes that leadership will generate resistance. We need leaders who discover energy in their relationship with God, in those relationships with others where God is deeply present, within their individual and communal calls, and they can let go of their own choices to follow God's call. You know, I've been talking a lot about what is God calling us to do and to be. It's a communal decision. And you'll need a new rector who can lead you along that path as well, because that's the culture we live in. We need leaders who are grounded in their spiritual lives, spiritual referring to what gives them life, motivated by our vision of ourselves and our culture. I did that wrong, but in relation to the divine. What gives you energy? What gives meaning to your life? What offers the framework that you use for your decisions? That's what being a Christian is about today. We need leaders who are action-oriented, who connect the values of the world with the values that we see in Jesus' life, who can connect the world and the church. You know, some people say that one of the impacts of the Enlightenment was to create a chasm between the world and the church. But postmodernism lets us, you know, begin to bridge and narrow the walls of that canyon. And then we need a leader who can also help diminish the chasm between nature and religion as well. And then someone who's willing to sacrifice short-range solutions that limit the future but lessens the immediate pressure and leading to calm. Well, I'll phrase it a little differently. Willing to sacrifice short-range solutions that limit the future, but lessens the immediate pressure and leads to calm, but cuts off future options. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's basically what I wanted to say. And I do think that, you know, we look at our church, we look at our world, and we see that our pews are not filled with young people. But I think, as I said, I think there's tremendous hope here, you know. And I could say, well, I love the Episcopal Church. I don't want it to diminish to nothing. But it's not so much that I love it. I think it offers hope for the world. You know, I think that our ability to live in the gray, our spirituality, are something that I think that people can find what we've all found in. You know, and so it's not like it's just going to go off the bottom. I think that we need to get the word out there somehow, and I think people are trying to do it, so that's the end of my talk. So what do you all have to say? Go on.
I feel very strongly that what makes a good Episcopalian is someone who starts in the Presbyterian or the Baptist church or the Lutheran church as a little one and opens her eyes, and this is what happened to me. There is just wonderful things in these other churches, and they're not shy about talking about their faith, whereas the Episcopalians are still shy about talking about their faith. And the only way I will talk about my faith is somebody will see my cross and say, "Tell me about it."
Right, yeah. Did you all hear that?
Yes.
Okay, I hope the mic picked it up too. Yes.
My experience in changing the way I perceive my own faith was working with the kids.
Really?
And I was quite involved several years ago with the diocesan youth.
Uh-huh.
And
So working through the diocesan youth helped you change your faith.
Oh, definitely. Because
Yeah.
when you hear the kids talk about where they think their faith is, they're real honest about it. They don't fool around. They may not speak to a group of adults that way, but boy, they will to each other.
Right.
And, it's amazing what you learn about where kids are, teenagers especially.
Right.
And I don't think we give them enough credit and we could probably learn from them.
Right. Right. We don't, I think that that's part of the Enlightenment, that children are seen and not heard, and that they don't, like when I was growing up in the UCC, I never went to church, even like not for communion or anything, until I was confirmed at the age of 13. We were very definitely, we sang in the choir, but that was about it. And today, people want to know what the young people are thinking, and then we can learn a lot from them. Yes?
Just to expand on that a bit, I think in the youth group that I was involved with, and from what I've heard from other youth group leaders, that what means the most to them are the outreach and the activities that they do.
Right.
That really, the liturgy is just not something that they connect with.
Right.
But the action speaks very, very loudly.
Right. Young people today definitely want to serve. I think they could connect with the liturgy, but there are stumbling blocks.
There are.
You know.
Definitely.
Yes, James?
Say for youth, church is not just Sunday,
Right,
so there needs to be flexibility about when we're open.
right. For youth, church is not just Sundays, so we need to be flexible about when we're open. Yes,
To add
Jane.
to this,
Yeah.
the traditional way of doing Eucharist, there was a youth event here in the diocese, and the bishop was there, and we were going to have Eucharist, and we all sat on the floor in small groups and did the Eucharist in individual small groups. And the kids couldn't believe that it wasn't a priest that was doing it, that we were giving it to each other, and it really had an impact on the kids.
Right. Yeah, but I'm sure that a priest led a prayer of consecration
Oh, yes,
at some
yes, yes,
point.
that was kind of
Right, right.
The fact
But
that
yes, the fact that you can give it to each other.
that they could give it to each other.
Right. Yeah, it's really powerful to have the
Yes.
person next to you say the body of Christ.
Right, yes.
Yes.
And I've just started a book called by Barbara Brown Taylor,
Mm-hmm.
An Altar in the World,
Right.
which talks about this very thing in particular.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's a great book if you haven't read Altars in the World. It's a wonderful book. And she talks about, you've probably heard of her. She's a nationally known preacher. And she was in a little church in Georgia, and people were flocking to it to hear her preach. But of course, they were only visiting. And there was real tension between the fact that none of them were pledging to keep up the church, and yet they were all coming and, using electricity, etc. And so she eventually left that and went to Piedmont to teach. And then, and she wrote a story, Leaving Church. She wrote a book, Leaving Church, about her experience leaving the church, which was, she was so burned out, it was unbelievable. She was seeing dead people in the road as she drove. She needed to make a change very definitively. But this is the next step for her, so she's not behind an altar every Sunday. So where are the altars where she's finding God in the world? It's a quite powerful book. I'm sure she's still finding it in the Eucharist as well. But, it's a great book. Very eye-opening. Other people? What do you think about this idea about moving? Do you experience this in your life, that the world somehow is changing from what you expect it to be. Yeah. Yes, Tom?
I think all of what you say is true, and I think you're absolutely right on. And I wonder if maybe part of the search today, this people looking around for some sort of relationship with a creator, with God, isn't in some ways a search for one or two really honest to gosh absolute truths. That there are, in fact, some absolute truths out there, despite all the relativism and everything else. There are unchanging truths, and I think one of them is love. I'm not sure what the others are. And to my way of thinking, I think that helps explain to some extent why some kinds of churches grow as strongly as they do, because they do present, whether you like it or not,
Right.
some absolute
Black and white.
truths.
Yes. Yeah.
You know?
Yes, absolutely. And as you said, people are just so that other people, and I'm aware that this ends up on the webpage too. I don't know if you know that. But, so I want to repeat what you said. Basically, you believe that this is reality, but that people are searching for ultimate truths. And one of them is love.
I think where we are today is this miasma of ideas, and
Right.
nothing is, all the ground is constantly shifting, and we're looking for something.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and in the second letter of John, it says God is love.
Yeah.
And I think that from my perspective, you know, that's what people are ultimately talking about. And then you talked about how, because there's such a desire for ultimate truths on the part of so many people, that they want to find a church that tells them what truth is, as opposed to something like us, where we kind of live in the tension between different truths. Exactly. Yeah. Although, you know, some of those churches are diminishing in size now too, and I don't know ultimately what that means. I have no idea. Yes.
Back when I was teaching Sunday school,
Right.
I seemed to specialize in teenagers.
Uh-huh.
And in New York, it began. And my curriculum was, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
What do I do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds actually very postmodern.
I would expose them to all sorts of situations
Mm-hmm.
in the world,
Right.
and they would discover these things instead of my telling them.
Right.
For
Right.
example, we
So
used to
basically,
go-
you were telling them, when you taught young people in New York, your curriculum was who am I, and what do I do, and you exposed them to lots of different situations and let them work it out for themselves.
I did that here in Maine
Mm-hmm.
until 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
But we used to go down to the Sisters of St. Margaret
Mm-hmm.
in Massachusetts and listen to what they're doing in Haiti.
Right.
And that was part of my class.
Yeah.
Go down
Well,
there.
maybe you were ahead of your time. He said they used to go to the Sisters of St. Margaret, which is a female order in the Episcopal Church, and they have a really wonderful ministry in Haiti that there's been a lot of publicity in the church about since the earthquake there, and I'm sure you exposed them to a lot of service. A lot of what you did was very fitting for the time we live in today.
Well, we would talk about things like the world, what it's composed of,
Mm-hmm.
who made it.
Right.
So I've for years, I'm married
expose them to different ways of looking at things. Right.
They didn't know, for example, that half of the oxygen in the world is produced in the oceans by single-cell marine phytoplankton.
Yeah. So you really were exposing them to a lot of things. Does anybody else have any thoughts or experiences? Yeah.
I think this is terrific and helps one kind of think through the past and where we are and what the future looks like. I guess I'm more concerned that the Episcopal Church is not the inheritor of the directions that you pointed out here. I think it tends to be a fairly rigid church, ritualistic. It starts with an assumption of faith and belief, which if you're not on that plane, you have a hard time really getting much out of the sermons and so forth. So that's not to say that the Episcopal Church can't change to position itself so that it does accept the future and adjust to it.
And attracts people who know they're struggling.
Yeah.
Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Right.
I was going to make sort of the opposite observation that it's a place to come where you can air your doubts and talk to people who have the same values or similar values, that are not really locked in.
Well, we do have, we all have different experiences.
And
so,
the small group experience, I think, helps that a great deal.
well, that's true. I think that's true. And so, and yet we can seem to be, ritualistic. And I think there is a sense that we come to believe what we say Sunday after Sunday. That's kind of a watchword. But that there has to be room, there has to be acknowledgement that we struggle, because we all do. And that we are not all, we're not perfect people. It's the bottom line. Yeah. And so I think that there are very different perspectives depending upon who you are and what you're doing. Yes?
I would just like to say that as much as I love the ritual of the Episcopal Church, that I would like us to maybe have an attitude of come as you are, that you don't need to be an insider, you don't have to have insider knowledge, that you can walk into the church and feel a sense of welcome and of acceptance of who you are and where you are, that it doesn't require you to be of a certain socioeconomic status or have a certain level of education or necessarily have been raised in the Episcopal Church or any church for that matter. Just would love for our church to become that place where people can come and serve.
Right. So you're talking about just so I can say it, you're talking about the need you see for us to be a church where you can come as you are, from whatever kind of strata of society, level of education, and be warmly welcomed and integrated. That's the other part of it all, to be integrated into the community. Yeah. So, well, it's time for us to end. Thank you all very much. And if there is anyone who missed this or who you think would appreciate looking at it, it is on, I've not watched them. I have no idea what all this looks like, but it is on our website. Each of these are on the website. And next time we're going to talk about the life cycle of a parish. This is a vibrant and exciting parish. And the question is, what do you need to do to keep it that way? So, thank you very much.
How you doing? Good.
Good. Have you had your winter sojourn yet?
No, we're going in March. Yeah. But sweaty up there. The ice is thick enough.